Okay, I would like to welcome you to session 10. This session is called Using and Increasing Creativity, Interventions and Tools. And our first speaker will be Giulia Fusi. She has a master's degree in clinical developmental psychology and neuropsychology from the University of Milano Bicocca, and I hope I don't butcher this name. She's a PhD student in human capital formation and labor market relations at the University of Bergamo. She's also a teaching assistant in psychobiology and clinical neuropsychology. Her research interests are creativity and divergent thinking in healthy and pathological aging, the relationship between divergent thinking abilities and cognitive reserve, and the potential role of the latter for prevention and intervention in the aging population. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I am very pleased to be here. What I want to talk about today is a new cognitive stimulation program designed for patients affected by mild cognitive impairment that is called CREC, that stands for Creativity in Everyday Life Challenges. Since not everyone comes from the psychological field, I start by explaining two key concepts that are pivotal for the understanding of our research. First of all, what is cognitive reserve? CR is a theoretical construct derived from the repeated observation that there isn't a direct relationship between brain damage and clinical manifestation, such as cognitive symptoms. CR models suggest that our brain actively attempts to cope with brain damage by building a new pathway, which are hypothesized to derive also from our previous life experiences, such as work, school, or free time activities, which prevent us from cognitive decline. And second, what is mild cognitive impairment? MCI is a clinical diagnosed entity which defines patients that are in the transitional stage between normal and pathological aging. And that patients are characterized by a slight cognitive decline in one or multiple domains, but this hasn't an impact on their daily life activities. But what have pushed us to design this research? First, recent evidence have proved the effectiveness of cognitive training based on creative exercise. But a lot is still to be done for the elderly population. And recent evidence have also highlighted the relationship between divergent thinking and cognitive reserve, so that divergent thinking and creativity in general could be a potential resource to improve cognitive reserve and flexibility of thought. So our aims are primarily to evaluate the feasibility of our training, CREC, built by Colautti and colleagues in 2018, because this training, it was originally built for a different type of patients that are patients with acquired brain lesion. And secondarily, we want to strengthen flexibility of thought and creative cognition and analyze the effect of our training on cognitive divergent thinking and psychological measures. Let's move on to the description of our training. CREC, it was built and focused on the three mental operations underlying creative cognition according to the Fousey model, hypothesized in 2011 by Antonietti and colleagues. Through our exercises, we want to strengthen and to stimulate all these processes that are widening, connecting, and reorganizing. Widening stands for the ability to keep an open mind, to be aware of a great element that characterizes a given situation, and to find novel meanings. And connecting refers to the ability to find relationships and combine different ideas. And finally, reorganizing stands for the ability to reorganize all these elements by taking different perspectives. we try to stimulate all the VCR processes and the creativity in order to help the patients to face their everyday life challenges that they have to deal with. And we try to help them to use these strategies in their everyday life in an adaptive way. So, going to depth, CREC is a 10-group session conducted by 2 facilitators, and groups are composed by a maximum of 6 patients, and every CREC session is characterized by different activities. First, we begin with temporal orientation, and in the first session, we begin with the presentation of participants, and in the next session, we continue by trying to do a summary of what has been done in the next session, in the previous section. Then we propose the first exercise, that is praxic-constructive exercise, in which we give different instructions to the patients in order to build object or construction with different kind of materials, such as, for example, wooden pieces or tangram or geomag. This exercise has different type of complexity. For example, the easiest instruction could be to build the tallest construction possible, or a more difficult instruction could be to build an object from a specific semantic category, such as animal, for example. And we try to give instant feedback to the patients about the strategy that they use to solve this problem, and we stimulate them to use this strategy along all the exercises. Then I'll try to explain the second task by reading you an example. A strange or paradoxical situation like this one is given to the patient. A normal woman walks on water. The water in that point is 6 meters deep. The woman actually walks on the water and not on a bridge. The woman wears normal shoes and not special floating ones. How do you explain it? This, at the first sight, could be absurd or impossible, and so the patient have to move away from an automatic way of response. They have to widen and connect all the given elements and reorganize them in order to find the right solution that, in this case, is that this woman is walking on an iced lake. Okay, for the third task, we use fictitious news on a newspaper, of which you can see here an example, cinema cue for the theater, or a little video on the screen of a laptop. We try to stress all the VCR process again, and here the patients have to find unconventional but functional solution to a specific problem, that in this case is the cinema cue for the theater. And they have to consider it with an unusual point of view. And finally, we propose an adapted serious games or an alternative uses task in which we ask the patient to find unusual uses of a common object. Okay, in this pilot study, and I stress the pilot study, we enrolled the 6 patients, 3 women and 3 men, of which you can see here the mean and standard deviation of age and educational level, and all of them were submitted to a pre- and post evaluation which assesses 3 different domains, which are cognitive, divergent thinking, and psychological domains. And we also calculate the cognitive reserve. But definitely the future research design will involve at least 1 active control group in order to ensure that our results are not due to practice or expectancy effects. So here we can see the preliminary results about cognitive measures. Qualitative analysis showed significant clinical improvement in different cognitive functions that we can see here in the bar charts. We can see here in green the pre-scores evaluation and in orange the post-evaluation. And our patients have improvement in memory with Dubois 5 words and decreases time in accomplish the test for attention and flexibility of thought that are trial-making test part A and B. and finally in executive function in semantic fluency and clock drawing test. Nevertheless, only semantic fluency reached the statistical significance. Slight improvements were also observed in the psychological measure. Decreased scores were observed in the scales for apathy, depression, and anxiety. Unfortunately, none of them reach now the significant statistical significance. And here we can see in the table that also the score for divergent thinking, and we choose ATA test, which is an abbreviated form of the famous Torrance test. We can see that the scores seem to remain stable between the pre and post-training, so that it seems that with our training we stimulate more and we have an impact more on general cognition, such as attention and executive function, rather than on divergent thinking per se. So, in conclusion, CREC has shown good feasibility of the exercises on our patients, on patients affected by mild cognitive impairment, and great clinical results in terms of improvement in performances in cognitive tests, and decreases, even slightly, decreases in psychological measures such as anxiety, depression, and the third that I don't know. Okay. More patients are definitely needed to conduct more significant statistical analysis, and we need one active control group in order to make correct inferences about this data. So what we can say for now? For now, we can say that creative exercises like these could have a potential role, and be a potential tool for the cognitive stimulation program for this type of patients. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Giulia, for your presentation. Really nice. And I was wondering, what is your interpretation of this effect? You didn't reach an effect in creativity scores, but in cognitive scores using a creativity training. Which is your interpretation of this result?
I know, because when we do this training, we stressed a lot the strategies and the cognitive domain instead of the creative part, at least for this small pilot study. So maybe we can use these results to stress also the creative part, because, for example, we do not have a sort of psychoeducational part in which we teach them what is creativity. And maybe if we do that, they can do better also at divergent thinking test. We stress more cognitive domain, like, for example, attention or memory, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So really quickly, the semantic fluency, so I guess it's kind of two questions. Is that basically you got sort of more remotely associated fluency there? Did you try the Guilford Alternatives Uses test? Was the other question, sorry.
If we have used an alternative uses task.
Yeah, and also what is the semantic fluency based on?
Okay.
If not creative, like what do you mean by doing only cognitive strategy, I suppose?
Okay. Yeah. Semantic fluency is a neuropsychological test, which means that they have to find in 1 minute, for example, tell me all the animals that came to your mind. But we do not evaluate, for example, in this task, the originality or, for example. And so maybe we can add an alternative uses task, but we use that in the stimulation program, so I don't think that we can use as a task for our evaluation.
Just a small comment to what just Sergio said. Well, maybe the answer to this thing, to this finding, is that the same cognitive processes that exist for creativity are being used for other cognitive processes as well. So it doesn't mean that when you train for creativity, you don't develop other cognitive outcomes. You see what I mean? So it's okay. It's good.
Okay.
You put the mind to work. Yeah. That's the thing. You can't really realize that this kind of process is related to creativity and it's not related to any other cognitive outcome. You see what? Absolutely. This is how it goes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. And we'll go on to the second presentation. So our second speaker today is Rebecca Marrone. She is a PhD student and researcher in the School of Engineering from the University of South Australia. She has received her honors in psychology and currently researches the relationship between creativity and STEM. So STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. Rebecca works in collaboration with the University of Connecticut and Geelong Grammar School, as well as state and federal governments in Australia and beyond.
Thank you. Buonasera, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the use of creativity-based interventions in mathematics and how we can use these to address potential gender differences. So that is, how do both males and females experience maths differently, and how can we use creativity to help address some of these discrepancies? I'm going to start with a simple fact. So this is UNESCO's 2015 report on the percentage of male and female workers in STEM fields. So we can see here that there's a large gender disparity. Why is this an issue? Well, 80% of future jobs will require a STEM education. So if we have gender disparity, then we have a lack of equity in these fields. But this does not only just is an equitable debate, but it also translates economically. If we can have a more diverse workforce, then we can increase our bottom line, and research suggests this. Before I go into how creativity can do it, or what creativity is in mathematics, I'm going to start with why I'm passionate about this research and hopefully draw some parallels between it. Embarrassingly enough, this is a copy of my Year 8 maths report card. So as you can see by the results, I failed miserably. The NYA was a polite suggestion from the school to my parents that suggested Rebecca should not be tested on these remaining tasks. As you can see in red, my work ethic or ability to perform the tasks was A-worthy. So what was causing my failures? Well, simply put, it is the concept of mathematics anxiety. Basically, the feelings of worry and trepidation I'd experience in the presence of a mathematical task would cause me to completely freeze. I'm sure we're all familiar with what anxiety feels like. Your mind goes blank, your palms start sweating, and as evidenced here, often disaster can ensue. Luckily for me, at the time, I had a really considerate teacher. He knew I could do the work. And although he didn't say take a creative approach to solving these problems or overcoming these issues, he told me to use my hobbies. What did he do? He told me to look at the problem in a different way. I was into sport, so I combined the two. I used my passions of sport, my passion of running. I used generic algebraic equations, speed equals distance over time. I put my times in for the 100-metre sprint. I could work out what stage of the race I was slowest at. I got quicker because I used the knowledge, and it helped me run faster, but it also helped me change my attitudes towards mathematics. Why maths? I think we can generalise this to all STEM. Mathematics is at the basis of all STEM, so I'll use the terms interchangeably. But what is creativity in mathematics? Well, at the core of maths is the idea of problem solving. We solve problems in everyday life. Sure, they may not be quadratic equations, but how about, I've got 20 euro in my purse, I need to travel 200 kilometres, I'm hungry, what bus can I take, how far can I go? If we can define, so this is the creativity part here, if we can define a problem differently because we aren't anxious or lack confidence, we can fulfill our lives better. So whilst I'll be explaining this research in terms of the classroom, it can translate to our everyday life. Unfortunately, I'm an extremely common example of a modern student, and more so, an extremely common example of a female student. So research suggests that this notion of stereotype threat can help explain why there are gender differences in mathematics. So stereotype threat can be defined as a concern or worry that an individual's performance or actions will be perceived through the lens of a negative stereotype. So in mathematics, it wrongfully perpetuates the myth that males are innately better than females at maths. We see stereotypes in other fields. You know, some common examples: women aren't as good drivers, white men can't jump in basketball. In this instance, I'm using it in terms of mathematics. Why is it an issue? Well, it can lead to high levels of maths anxiety, maths avoidance, and lower levels of STEM course taking. So this is an issue that we start to experience really early on in our education from our first year of schooling. Why is creativity important? I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here on this, but the purpose of school has changed. We're preparing students for a world we can't envisage. So when they're stuck on something they've never seen before, they choose to think instead of remember. They choose to think outside the box, be flexible, be divergent thinkers. As we transition into this new Industry 4.0, when we have, you know, the amalgamation of physical and digital technologies, it's more important than ever to have a creative approach to being able to solve these problems. What is creativity? Well, in this context, I'm going to use Plucker, Bighetto, and Dow's definition, and just focus on that bottom line of defined within a social context. The rest you guys are all familiar with, but the social context I'm going to be referring to is an Australian research. It's Australian research, so it was based on the Australian national curriculum. So forgive me the neuroscientists in the room, I'm going to use a metaphor to explain what happens to the brain when we're anxious and then what happens when we're creative. So if we think of the brain like a highway, that's our working memory or ability to solve problems in the here and now, what we typically engage in when we're solving a mathematical problem in a classroom. When information is able to flow through freely, it's like the 4 lanes of a highway are open. There's no traffic, everything can get through fine. But what happens when you're anxious? It's like there's a roadblock. There's traffic up ahead, the lights turn red, the information just cannot get through. Why is this an issue? Your working memory becomes overloaded, you can't solve the problem, but what is this going to do? Potentially it's going to reinforce those negative attitudes that we may have, or it's at least going to potentially start the formation of negative attitudes. What can creativity do, or what can creativity provide, is potentially another route. We look at the problem in a different way. We define the problem differently. In essence, it can help us overcome this anxiety because it can open up our working memory. So if we start to develop positive attitudes, we start to have positive experience with mathematics equations, we're less likely to have our working memory compromised in our classroom. So what was the study? Well, we did several studies, but a couple I'm going to talk about today. The first one had about 1,400 students from an Australian school which was in the state of Victoria. So we had a total of 625 males and 500 females who ranged in age from 8 to 18, but we have a mean age of around 14 years old. So every student was measured 4 times. So I have to explain this, that the school year in Australia is January to December. So when I say that students were measured 4 times in a school year, if they were in year 5 at the start of 2016, when we started this, they ended the year also in year 5. So we did that once a term for that school year. Then we followed it up 2 years later, once in 2018. So this is a longitudinal experiment over 2 years. So for starters, we looked at an instrument that looked at mathematics, and then I'm going to compare it to a verbal creativity task as well. So the mathematics one had 2 sections. So to start with, it was a metacognition maths task, which was a self-report measure of creative self-efficacy in mathematics. An example question that students were presented with was, I am confident that I can use my imagination to arrive at the number 8, for example. Every time the students engaged in the task, that number was different. So the example I'm using here is 8, but in another term it was 13, and so on. Then students were given 3 minutes in which they were told to creatively design an equation in which they arrived at the answer 8. They were prompted with a statement that, for example, 4 plus 4 is not very creative. So they're given 3 minutes. Post-task, we use this metacognition self-efficacy measure again, And it was, the questions were in a past tense form. So I'm confident that I creatively used what I know in maths to get to the answer 8. Then we got independent judges. They actually rated the students' ability to be creative. So on a scale of 1 to 6, we rated students' actual equations. The second instrument was a verbal task, and it started in a similar way. So it was a metacognition task, similar 3 questions, but this time it was, I'm confident I can use my imagination to creatively design a title for a photo. This example here is one of the photos that the students were provided with. And then post-task, we got the same self-efficacy measures. So I won't take you through these hypotheses. Rather, what we suggest is that based on stereotype threat, based on the notion of maths anxiety, we're going to see gender differences in the maths task, but not in the photo caption task. So what did we see? Well, we saw just this. If we take the pre-example here, so this was the pre-self-efficacy questions, we can see that it's a statistically significant difference between males and females, with males having higher self-efficacy. And this was with a small to medium effect size, and similar post-task. I'll just rush through and look at what about when we compared it to the photo caption? Similar. We didn't see gender differences that were meaningfully interpretable on the photo caption task. We only saw it on the maths task. And again, this was at pre and post and with the judges. I then thought, great, we found what we wanted to. We found some gender differences, but this isn't exactly helpful, and nor is it what we want in our population of students. So I designed a pilot study on the impact of a creativity-based intervention on teacher attitudes towards maths. So it was a pilot study, and I got around 10 to 15 teachers where I gave them a pre-test measure of their maths anxiety and their attitudes, a creativity-based classroom intervention, which I tailored for the teachers. So these were primary school teachers. So from the first grade of teaching all the way through to our top grade in primary school, so it's about 8 year levels. So obviously it was tailored for each participant, post-test, and then a 6-month follow-up. Just an example of the classroom general principle. One of the ideas is what should teachers foster in their students? For example, possession of a fund of general knowledge. You can't be creative in mathematics unless you have this foundation of knowledge. You can't ask a student to design algebraic equations if you don't first teach them, say in year 3, what a plus and a minus symbol are. So that's just an example. So what did we find? Well, this is just a quick snapshot of the attitudes towards mathematics. We can see that as post-intervention and 6 months later, the teachers both enjoyed and valued teaching mathematics more. Why is this important? We know from research that if we encourage positive attitudes in teachers, this transfers over to their students. The majority of primary school teachers in the West are female, so the majority of these participants were female. If we can encourage them and help them shape more, and develop more positive attitudes towards teaching mathematics, this is going to influence their females in the class. So I just want to reiterate and bring it back to why is creativity important? The purpose of school has changed. We've got, I can see everybody out here, and obviously I go through and say, we've got startups that look at AI and looking at maths. We can use divergent thinking tasks and sticky notes. Neuroscience, polyphony, ethnography, creative conversation, possibilities, meaning of life, purpose, creative self-efficacy, national television, neuroscience, all sorts of different things that we can help demonstrate why creativity is important, but how we use mathematics in creativity and how we can use this as a tool to help shape our future students. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for this beautiful talk. Does anyone have questions for Rebecca?
Hi, Rebecca. Congratulations. I have more comments and suggestions to you than questions themselves. Have you heard about, or coincidentally, Riccardo Fragelli?
Sorry?
Have you heard about Riccardo Fragelli? Okay, he's a Brazilian teacher. Yeah. Okay, he works in the same university I do, and he's spreading a methodology in Brazil of a collaborative teaching in mathematics, in order for students help each other in groups or in teams to solve problems and reduce the fail in mathematics. He's been very successful. He doesn't really talks about creativity. Okay, it's not his issue, but he's making a very good work on this issue. He published the book. Okay, it's in Portuguese. I don't know if it was translated, but it will be about the 300 method. He's calling this. I can give you his contacts.
Yes,
and Clayton Gontijo, have you read him?
I'm not sure, yeah.
Okay, it's a colleague of mine who works with education in mathematics. I've been in the PhD exam of a student of him, and could tell him what he did about this. He was reading about leadership and organizations to work with groups and teams, and and try to solve some problems in the teaching and learning in mathematics. So that thing you mentioned now about the different knowledge here, how they can contribute. It's very important, but because even today some people like me fear statistics, and I have to learn something about it.
Yeah,
okay?
Awesome.
And it could be very helpful for killing this phantom. Let's say like this. So if you ever want one of their contacts, okay, Clayton, I think he has something published in English.
Okay,
and I can suggest more congratulations.
Thank you. I think I should mention as well, I completely forgot, Marrone, the perfect example of how we can take creativity in mathematics and break down stereotypes or theoretical formulas that we can't send waves across mountains or across the world, and I think that probably should have included him at the end there, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, so I suggest that you all ask Rebecca your remaining questions in the coffee break, and then I'm ready to introduce our third speaker.
Thanks.
So I can't possibly do justice to all the work she's doing within research and beyond, but I'm going to try. Our first speaker is Shama Rahman. She's a creative scientist, artist, futurist, and interdisciplinary practitioner. She has a PhD in complex neuroscientific systems of creative cognition and is co-author of the book chapter Multidisciplinary Contributions to the Science of Creative Thinking. Additionally, she has a TEDx talk on multidisciplinary creativity, is an actor and musician, and received an Arts and Science Award for a creative production company, Juggler Productions, that envisions a rich interaction between science and creative performance as equally fundamental parts of culture. Lastly, she is the CEO of Neuroscience, building personalized IA collaborations to enable flow.
I thought we were going to shorten that. Hello, everybody. Are we still alive? Just about? Okay. All right, so I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about how AI and neuroscience can come together and how our understanding of that can create us to design them in a way that can be symbiotic and spark human creativity. So we've come across this traditional creativity definition even. So it's about being novel, it's about being surprising, either to elicit an aesthetic or effective response. It's also about being useful, though obviously you can also look at this from the perspective of adding value. Something that a few of the speakers have looked at is maybe how we can progress this idea a little bit and take it to the multidisciplinary perspective, and how multidisciplinary creativity can give us different perspectives if we straddle different domains, and also different sensory stimulation. So I was very happy to found a creativity conference in Bologna about 5 years ago, where I first presented the results of my PhD and was invited to contribute to their book on the multidisciplinary contributions of the science of creative thinking, where I was looking at the neuroscience of the different stages of creativity and also the different types of creativity. And I've given a little TEDx talk on that. But in addition to the academic aspect of it, I've learned very much from practice. So down there, you see me actually perform performing in Antarctica, so definitely the cold stimulated some sort of improvisation, which you can probably find online. Down there, this is me being part of the Southeast Asia's first supernatural detective thriller, I was told. And yeah, I don't know if anybody knows a little bit about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yep, okay, so apparently it's a mixture of that, X-Files and Scooby-Doo, and the Doctor Who people came and helped. And then around the sort of areas you see, that was being an acting sort of gig, but in my own musical practice, I often combine different types of digital interfaces which can allow us to be more analog in our expression. So I'm very much involved in how we can use technology to help us and enhance us. Using this methodology, during my PhD, I was running a creative art science production company, Jugular Productions, aka joining the head and the heart. So essentially bringing very heady academic subjects. On the right there, we're looking at the neuroscience of memory and recall, and on the left here is Professor Richard Farragher, who's now turned out to be a dear friend of mine. We continuously work on things to do with longevity and a healthier life when it comes to immortality. And down here, joining sort of these heady activities of the head, we have lived visceral experience through performance, where you see a body contortionist talking about body memory, and over there, we created a little play on the disastrous yet quite comical effects of taking a pill to forget your last argument with your boyfriend. And using this sort of idea of multidisciplinary experience design, just wanted to set the scene as to where we'll be going next with this. We used 2 bits of research that apparently those who sing together synchronize their body rhythms. And there's yet another piece of research that shows that when people synchronize their heartbeats, this is the basis of group empathy. So I thought that's a great situation to have a bit of a social experiment at one of our events, and really an excuse for me to have a great sort of love up at the end of it, and people can leave thinking they had an amazing time. So how did this actually happen? How do we combine the 2 things? We had actors and musicians come and take the pulse of an audience member, and they used that as the sort of rhythm to then set the music pulse that everybody else could hear. And then we encouraged everybody to start singing to that particular pulse. And yes, believe it or not, we even got them to get up, start moving, and dancing. And by the end of it, we used a little thing on the back of a few of our phones. You probably see it. It's a little infrared pulse oximeter where you can actually measure your heartbeat. And we went around to every single person and we went, oh, that's funny. Everyone's got 119 BPM, like to the number. And then the composer goes, do you want to know what the BPM was? What do you think he said? Yeah. So that was a really interesting example of using quite analog basis to actually create a technological sort of enhancement of our experience, because music is actually the very first technology that we ever created as humans in order to engender communication, before words, rhythm. So yes, as humans, we've always used tools. They started from an analog place, and now obviously we're in a very digital space. And a lot of the times, especially when you think about art, it's about representing externally what we have inside, in our heads. Now we have a different form of digital called AI, where I'm proposing that we're closing the loop so that we're not just looking at our representation and we're apart from of it, but we're that we're apart from it, but we're actually part of it now. What do I mean by that? Has anybody come across these examples of images? Do you care to take a little guess as to what's going on here? So there's a thing called Google Deep Dream, and it's a form of a deep learning model where you're fed lots and lots of different images. I'm sure you can guess who that one is. It's a really weird picture of Van Gogh, right? But it looks weird because it's also been fed with lots of pictures of birds. And then it starts morphing and tries to create its own pictures. And they said it was a really interesting example of what we might actually be doing when we're dreaming. So it's kind of like a little window as to how things are synthesized and put together. Similarly on that, they all look kind of horrific. But the one at the bottom, this is an example of AI actually creating new styles of art altogether. And so is that influencing us back? Similarly, do these photos look real to you? They do. I hear a bit of a but. They're not real, obviously. If I had a PowerPoint, I would have gone and revealed these are AI generated, but no, now you know. So yeah, again, you can see it's not just additive, linear things of taking a nose from one person and an ear from the other. The AI is actually being fed with lots and lots of different inputs and then morphing them together in a non-linear way, producing its very own images. So yeah, that's a bird. It looks like a bird, like any other bird that you might have seen, but this bird doesn't exist. So, what about this? People would have come across this before, right? New? Okay, nobody makes websites? So, on the left there, it's an actual AI-powered website generator, so making websites so painful a thing of the past. On the right, that's orange is the new black, where AI is kind of showing its sort of automation processes in terms of being able to produce lots and lots of different layouts. And down here, where it says pluck, that's actually an AI-generated logo, completely. No designer involved. So, sorry. And so what is the future of creativity is a question that I want to start asking. Technology to enable and enhance human capabilities is something I'm quite hopeful about. So this all came about, if you went back to Jugular, where I was actually asked to curate a poetry festival a few years ago. And it was quite interesting because there were the human poets and then something called the poetry bots. And these are a whole variety of different AI-powered poetry machines, essentially. And we thought it'd be really interesting to have, create an experience where we would co-create a poem together, man versus machine. Classic, But what was really interesting is as it went along, I very quickly realized that it wasn't man versus machine, it was man and machine. Because invariably, any of the suggestions that the AI was coming up with was met with quite stunned silence from the humans, in the sense that it was nearly always thought-provoking, esoteric perhaps, but definitely thought-provoking. And nobody went, I'm going to reject that. Everybody went, why didn't I think about that? And the thing is, they did think about it, and what we end up doing is we have something called like a self-critic and an editor that doesn't allow a great deal of the, the ideas that we actually come up with out into the world. Maybe that's because we don't think that it sounds clever, or we think we're going to be judged, or we don't fully work out its potential. But what the AI was doing was going, "Blah, here you go," right? And then it allowed us to actually examine it from the outside. And then what man was doing was shaping these sort of suggestions into very beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, and emotionally reaching and connecting poems. So that's where the idea came about for Neurocreate, where the idea is to bring AI and neuroscience together, or the knowledge of the neuroscience together, to actually help the creative frameworks. So what we've created is we've digitized a lot of design thinking tools. We're trying to take people through a cognitive framework of creativity. It's very much an active relationship between human and AI, and the idea is that it sparks creativity in you. So how does it do that? Well, first off, we want to see whether it can be something that's a practice that you can use daily in order to encourage your creative thinking. And also, we are looking at aspects of whether it could be useful for well-being, just like our previous speaker was talking about. So we are following some of the frameworks of Wallace, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, where preparation is all about formulating and constructing the problem at hand, and also looking through a lot of research, filling your mind with lots and lots of information, that incubation period where you leave it all to one side and go for a walk, and then that sort of eureka insight moment. And this is where I think something called flow ends up happening in quite a sort of interrelational manner. So you have that little insight, and then you implement it via flow, and then you have another little mini insight, and then you have another sort of stint of flow. And I think a great deal of people know already what I mean by the flow state, but it was coined by a positive psychologist called Csikszentmihalyi, and in turn can lead to greater creativity when we can kickstart people into this altered state of consciousness, and also lead to more well-being. And then there's the verification period. So it is definitely looking at some of the neural mechanisms that seem to support some of these different stages. So lots of other neuroscientists have looked at the incubation period and found that the mind-wandering sort of association with the default mode network might be actually linked to that. Down here is was one of my supervisors, Jyoti Bhattacharya, who actually looked at this particular activity as a predictor of answering a riddle correctly, so insight. And then my own work where I looked at improvisational flow, and that's only one of the areas, but one of the very important areas of the brain, which is the medial prefrontal cortex, which is a hub that allows a lot of different parts of the brain to come together very quickly. And then there's also the precuneus and the dorsolateral cortex on the right hemisphere. So taking this knowledge into account, how can we create a bit of a framework? So we chose words as the symbols of thought and also the instrument of problem construction and conceptualization. So they're like digital sticky notes. I added that later, okay. Enables, so first of all, what I mean by that. So you enter a topic that you actually want to explore. I don't know if you can see this, but I will actually have a demo that you guys can come and play with after this. But it visualizes it as if it's 1 or 2 words on a sticky note, and then it starts giving you suggestions that are actually semantically quite related to the concepts that you're looking at. So it's quite active in trying to give you these suggestions. And then it allows you to look at different perspectives. So it's digitizing design thinking tools like the 6 hats and TRIZ and trying to help you look at things from all these different angles. Also allows you to do research on the fly on that, say, on that word artists there very quickly, so you don't get lost in Google. And you can bring it all back to the platform to carry on working on it. It also looks at the overall topics from your entire, say, 40, 50-minute ideation session and looks at the sort of emergent themes that are coming from that. And then it puts it through different filters, or also looks at connecting themes between different points in the ideation that you might have. And yeah, puts it through different filters like story plots, motivations, archetypes, and persona. And if you're interested in writing stories or, you know, even looking at products and, you know, looking at sort of product values or brand values of companies, it also creates haikus and generates taglines and proverbs. It also looks at things through ethics, which is kind of ironic when an AI is looking at ethics about itself right there. And also values and product design. So some of the techniques that we're using here, divergent thinking, in order to generate lots of ideas within here, many possible solutions, an emergent cognitive manner, convergent thinking where you're reapplying and accumulating lots of information, and decision-making strategies. The idea is to create unexpected connections, giving you a very flexible framework in order to help you organize, structure, and synthesize different ideas. The 6 hats and TRIZ are there to help with this multi-perspective and multidisciplinary sort of stimuli. Again, sort of digitizing some of these sort of more analog things I started off by telling you with, right? So what we're trying to do is we want to ground the ideation to a particular problem construction or topic. We want to analyze the inherent themes and empathy build through different persona and archetypes. And we're trying to move towards a bit of a unitary process, combining that sort of problem-solving, scientific enlightenment way of thinking that was proposed in Geneva, and also you know, converging it with a sort of romantic, divergent, and expressive way of thinking. The main thing is that we want to allow and enable a nonlinear, flexible thinking framework that allows a dynamic switching back and forth. It's not just one thing and then another and then the other. The idea is that you are able to come back and forth in any way that you want, and to explore and be playful in idea generation, which can sometimes be quite frustrating, to be honest, right? And some of the benefits that people are talking about helps with strategy and discovery, differentiating ideas, ideation and design. It's topic relevant, helps you actually have this collaborative meeting and be a bit more productive. And we collected some feedback on the different aspects of it. And this is what I wanted to actually show you guys. So we did over 100 different trials on students and also professionals across different design, including product and fashion, also creative agencies and games. We asked them to rate different sort of properties of it between 1 to 5. And what you can see is at the games level, we actually showed them something that was maybe version 3. And as we go along higher and higher up to the fashion part, we're getting, you know, sort of scales between 4.6 to 4.8. This is basically the latest sort of example that we have now, the latest version that we have now. And some of the things I wanted to show you is one of the users was saying, it's interesting to use an AI to find ideas that our biased minds find hard to come up with. So it's kind of interesting because it's trying to show this sort of symbiotic and augmented intelligence. Another one goes, it's like a second brain, or like a ball pit from my brain. And so I basically want you guys to sit and think about the idea of how AI could help us extend our own human mind and our own human capabilities. So would that allow us to view technology in a more adaptive and flexible manner? And would that allow humans to be more creative and efficient? So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for this inspiring presentation. We went a little bit over time, but maybe there's one quick question before the coffee break? Or everyone just really needs coffee?
Everyone really needs coffee. If you guys are interested, please come and speak to me. That was a real whistle-stop tour of stuff. So the thing actually works. So come and have a play with it. So.
Start again at 4 o'clock.